A small group of British soldiers stood shivering in the rain, huddled behind a makeshift barricade of sandbags. It was 1916, and they were pinned down by German machine guns. For 3 days, their commanding officer had ordered them to attack, but with such heavy casualties, he was beginning to think it wasn't worth it. He knew that if they charged across the open field, they would be mowed down before even reaching the enemy trenches. Then something rumbled in the distance. A low growl soon became a roar as a British tank lumbered into view. Seeing their salvation, the men scrambled out of their trench and piled into the tank. As they crashed through the German lines, the very definition of an armored fist, the soldiers knew they would never go back to fighting in the trenches again. Tanks are one of the most iconic symbols of modern warfare. These heavily armored behemoths can level entire cities, tear through enemy defenses, and crush all resistance in their path. But tanks didn't always have it so easy. In fact, during World War I, tanks were almost defeated before they even made it to the battlefield. To understand how tanks changed the art of war, we first have to look at the battle that inspired their creation. For months, the Western Front had become a stalemate. The Germans had fortified their trenches with barbed wire, machine gun nests, artillery, and thousands of mines. This made attacking almost impossible, and yet this is exactly what the British High Command wanted. Ever since the invasion of Belgium, the British people had felt a growing sense of shame. Their army kept getting pushed further and further back. They needed a victory. But how could they defeat the Germans without losing more men? The answer came unexpectedly from a minor battle called the Battle of the Yser. The Germans and the Allies were dug in near the town of Ypres in Belgium. Both sides wanted the town, but the British and the Germans were locked in a deadly stalemate. Then suddenly, a unit of British soldiers spotted a small opening in the German lines. Seeing their chance, they ran across the field toward the German trenches. They lobbed grenades, fixed bayonets, and charged the enemy machine guns. They fought with such ferocity that they soon captured the German trenches. Overjoyed, the British commanders immediately dispatched a message to London. The newspapers would soon be filled with stories of their bravery. But then, the reality started to set in. The men had only managed to capture a few hundred yards of trenches. What was supposed to be a swift victory had turned into a bloody stalemate. Once again, the British found themselves trapped in a series of trenches, exposed to artillery fire and constantly under attack. As the weeks went on, the conditions in the trenches grew worse and worse. There was no sunlight, fresh air, or even food. Disease ran rampant. Soldiers were bitten by rats and constantly fought off poisonous gas attacks. It became clear that something had to change. The British High Command reached out to the French and saw that they too were stuck in a network of deadly trenches. They realized that their armies were exhausted and simply couldn't keep up the fight. If they were going to win the war, they needed a way to defeat the German trenches without having to charge them. At first, the British thought that artillery might be the answer. The loud, explosive weapons were already used extensively throughout the war. Powerful cannons could shoot high-powered shells for miles, but the British soon discovered that no amount of artillery could break the stalemate. Even though a few shells landed in the German trenches, most of them fell harmlessly into the ground between the rows of thick wooden stakes. Still, the British were convinced that they could somehow defeat the trenches. So they reached out to the Italian military, who had recently invented a new type of weapon. When the British heard about the weapon, they thought it was just another type of artillery. But when the Italians showed them what it could really do, they were stunned. The weapon was called a carro armato, or armored car. The Italians had built around 200 of these strange vehicles and had been testing them against Austrian troops. The idea was simple. The armored cars could move through the battlefield at high speed, delivering powerful payloads directly to the enemy. Although the concept sounded promising, the British were skeptical. Could these strange vehicles really be effective? After all, previous attempts at mechanized warfare had failed miserably. But there was nothing to lose. So the British ordered 100 of the Italian tanks. They planned to use them as artillery, firing them from afar to bombard the German trenches. But as the British soldiers soon discovered, tanks don't work like artillery. When the time came to attack, the British tank crews had no idea where to go. Each tank was equipped with a plow that allowed it to move over rough terrain. But they had no real way of knowing what lay ahead. So when the crews attempted to move closer to the German trenches, they often crashed into deep holes, mounds of earth, or even barbed wire. As it turned out, tanks weren't suited for artillery after all. They couldn't fire accurately enough and were far too valuable to risk. The British needed a different plan. Fortunately, the British soon stumbled upon a solution. They realized that instead of using tanks as artillery, they should use them as weapons. If they sent tanks directly into the German trenches, they could rip apart the barbed wire, smash through the machine gun nests, and destroy the barricades. The British High Command was excited by the idea. But there was one problem. To work properly, tanks had to get close to the enemy, which meant that they had to drive through no man's land. No man's land was a treacherous area between the British and the German trenches, filled with barbed wire, explosives, and snipers. Not only were tanks unproven, but they also had to face the dangers of no man's land. On September 15, 1916, the British assembled their fleet of tanks and charged toward the German lines. At first, everything seemed to be going well. The tanks moved quickly through the battlefield, blasting apart the German defenses. But then disaster struck. One of the tanks ran over an anti-tank mine that had been left over from a previous battle. The explosion knocked out the engine and the crew struggled to escape the burning wreckage. Soon, several more tanks were destroyed by hidden mines. The remaining tanks kept moving forward, but it was clear that they weren't ready for the battlefield yet. Even though the British tanks were defeated, the British High Command refused to give up. They realized that tanks were the future of warfare. All they had to do was fix their weaknesses. With this in mind, they formed a secret weapons development team to design the perfect tank. The team would meet in a mysterious location code named Millionaire. There, top British engineers would develop the tank of their dreams. It would be fast, powerful, and virtually indestructible. They called it the Mark II. The Mark II was a revolutionary design. It was fast, maneuverable, and nearly twice as powerful as the German tanks. It was also equipped with a special plow that could cut through barbed wire and blast open the German trenches. When the Mark II first hit the battlefield, the German soldiers were stunned. They had never seen anything like it. The Mark II easily plowed through the barbed wire, blasted apart the machine gun nests, and crushed all resistance. The British tanks thundered across the battlefield, crushing all opposition and bringing the British victory. Tanks would change the nature of warfare forever. From then on, battles would be decided by who could produce the most tanks, not who had the biggest army. Although the Mark II was successful, it would be the Mark III that truly changed the course of history. The Mark III was the world's first true battle tank. It was large, slow, and extremely powerful. Unlike its predecessors, it wasn't designed to race across the battlefield. Instead, it was designed to stay in one place and deliver massive amounts of firepower. When the Mark III first hit the battlefield, the German soldiers were terrified. They had never seen anything like it. The Mark III easily tore through the German trenches, blasting apart the barricades and mowing down any soldiers who got in its way. The British tanks thundered across the battlefield, crushing all resistance and bringing the British victory. The Mark III was so successful that the Germans didn't even bother trying to stop it. They simply surrendered. In the years that followed, tanks would be used in every major war, from World War II to the Vietnam War and beyond. They would play a major role in the outcome of each conflict. And while tanks may seem like relics of the past today, they're still used extensively in modern warfare. In recent conflicts, tanks have proven to be a decisive force on the battlefield, and it's likely that they'll continue to be used for years to come. Click here to watch one of these next videos and let us know in the comments section which historical invention you'd like to see us cover in the next episode.